Call this meeting to order. Can we have a moment for prayer or reflection? Thank you.
So first item of business is adoption of the agenda. Anything to add?
Anything to add or amendments? Seeing none.
Thank you. And then adoption of the minutes. Minutes from our last meeting of October 4th and also from our organizational meeting of November 1st.
Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, we'll adopt the minutes.
Moving on now to presentations. We have several presentations tonight. The first one is Family Violence Prevention Month. From the Madison Hat Women's Shelter Society, we have Natasha Carvalho, who's the Executive Director, and Peggy Ravel, who is the Community Education and Awareness Coordinator.
Welcome to both of you. You have the floor.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mayor Clark and councillors. Thank you for having us here today. Trust us to crash your first council meeting to get in front of you to talk about our stuff. So this is Family Violence Prevention Month. As you all know, we declared it on November 5th with Mayor Clark, and we've had some walks and done some things already, but we thought we'd take a minute to just let you know what we've been up to and just let you know a little bit more about the programs and services at the shelter. So I think most of you are probably pretty familiar with our services and our programs, but I'm just going to give you the nutshell version of it all. We operate a 24/7 helpline that is quite busy and receives a whole variety of calls. We also offer an emergency shelter, which is called Phoenix Safe House. It's a 30-bed 21-day stay emergency shelter. I say 21-day loosely because people stay much longer than that. Sometimes people need housing and aren't able to get into it. Sometimes people are waiting to get into detox. There's very many different reasons. Sometimes it just takes that long for them to figure out what they're going to do. So they stay for as long as we need to keep them there to keep them safe. While at that shelter, they are involved with crisis intervention workers who help them work on safety plans to make sure if they do return to the unsafe situation, they remain safe as possible. Their children, if they come with them, are connected with our children's programming staff, and they provide wraparound supports to them to make sure that they are also getting the help that they need, because we recognize that family violence affects children from a very early age. We also are lucky to have a second stage shelter, which is built on the same property across the fence from it, and it is the only second stage shelter south of Calgary, so we do receive quite a lot of referrals for that shelter, and it keeps us pretty busy. It's 10 townhouse units, 2-story, 3-bedroom, so we can fit any kind of configuration of families in there. We have moms with 7 kids, we have moms who don't have their kids with them yet, maybe waiting for them to be returned from children's services, working on some parenting agreements like that, so different ways of doing it. The great thing about that is that that program, they get to stay there for a year. Some don't always stay a year, some stay 9 months, 6 months, whatever works for them, but it's long enough and it gives them enough time so that they can land back on their feet and maybe make some decisions not in the middle of crisis, and maybe feel like they can make some decisions once they've had some time to process and think about what their new life could look like. So we're really lucky with that program because we have some great partnerships. We have a great partnership with the food bank. They provide a food hamper for the families, and when the moms come in, their fridge is fully stocked and their cupboards are fully stocked, so that really makes a big difference for the mom, and she can really make sure food security is a huge thing, obviously. We have a great partnership with Madison Hat College that after they've been there for a while, we can hook them up with some advisors over at the college and figure out maybe they need to do some courses or do some things to help them with some upgrading. It's really open to them, but they can apply for bursaries through them, and then we really recognize that that's also a barrier for families, that many times mom returns to an abusive situation because she feels like she has no other choice or doesn't think that she can make it on her own. So we really want to make sure we can eliminate as many barriers as possible through that work. A couple of years ago, I think it's been a lot more than a couple of years ago, we started our Safe Families Intervention Team program with the Madison Police Service. Then Chief McGurgan and I got together and did some brainstorming about how we could do some early intervention and get to families in a different way, because we were recognizing there was a lot of families we felt were slipping through the cracks. So great partnerships with Crown and police, and we've worked on this program for almost 8 years now, and it's really doing really well, so much so that we've actually taken it off-site. We have off-site offices in the Ridge Professional Building, and we have 4 staff and a program manager over there, and they're kept pretty busy. They're kept pretty busy because, as you know, domestic violence, and the police will ascertain this as well, have gone up 29% this past year. It's a huge amount for our small city, and we're really seeing it in all facets of our program. So they're really busy. They were really busy during the pandemic. They saw a lot of families that we'd never seen before. A good thing probably that people are reaching out for help, but also concerning that many people are hurting and are stressed. So at the Ridge, we also have our Housing First program, and that's a partnership with Madison Community Housing. We've been offering that for over 10 years. So that's been a great program. Helps us to help people who are homeless in our community, make sure that they are landing on their feet, making sure that they are not couch surfing, helping them maintain their tenancy, making sure they're getting to the appointments that they need to do, and just supporting them through our harm reduction model to get to where they need to go on their journey to make sure they're doing as well as they can be. So that's been a really great program. That's really fast of all our programs, but I just wanted you to have sort of a version of it. But I'm really excited to tell you a new program that we just launched today with the hospital. So with AHS, we have started the Domestic Abuse Response Team. It's a provincial program with AHS, and we are one of the sites as well, and we just started today. So it basically just means that one of our outreach workers will be on call 24/7 to respond to calls from the emergency department. We're hoping that it'll expand to the maternity department and acute care as well, that when somebody comes in, they're asking them some pretty key questions to see if they have been experiencing family violence, and not necessarily just the physical bruises and cuts and things like that, but sort of digging a little maybe deeper and asking some of those harder questions. But if so, and if they're open to it and they're willing to meet with somebody similar to the SFIT kind of concept, we'll send somebody over there to talk to them pretty soon and get them to where they need to be, do some safety planning, get them to shelter or whatever they need to do. But we're pretty excited about that partnership. So. Thanks. Sorry, Peggy, I made you jump with 3 slides. Can you go back? Those are our numbers for the past year. As you can see, our numbers have gone up quite a bit as well this year as well. I think what's really poignant to me, and the school teacher and Councillor Dumanowski will agree with me probably too, is 383 of that were children. And I think that's always my concern and my worry, that kids are so impacted by family violence, and kids who are innocent victims in these situations are often dragged into these situations and have long-lasting effects. So we are working really hard in our children's program. We have a daycare on site as well, and we provide services to the kids in many capacities, outreach groups. We do a big summer program, so all different ways that we can to get to the kids as early as we can and in a supportive way as we can, to have those conversations and make sure that they're safe and that they know that they're not to blame and that they need to receive the help that they need as well. Those are the police numbers, which you would have seen in your commission report, 29% DV calls compared to the year before. So very concerning. As we know, people are really hurting. We're definitely seeing that in our shelter. We're definitely seeing that through COVID. People are coming in a lot more distress and a lot more crisis. And people who were already in I was saying this to somebody the other day, you know, the pandemic was hard on all of us, being told to stay at home and hang out with your partner, and, you know, maybe there was a job loss, all of a sudden your kids are home. Normal, average people who aren't in crisis and in trauma were struggling with those kind of things. And so you add family violence to that, and job loss and addictions and mental health and capacity, and it just snowballs. And so that's definitely what we're seeing in the shelter. We're struggling with trying to support people in the best possible way that we can. We want to make sure that we're here for them, but we want to know, we acknowledge as well that there's a lot else going on than just the family violence piece. So we've stayed open, of course, through the shelter. We're an essential service, so throughout the pandemic, we didn't shut down at all. We just pivoted, an overused word, but it is true, to think about how we could do things a little differently. So we offer sessions over Zoom if people weren't able to come in. in, which has been great for people in some out of the outlying areas to access services, actually, silver lining. We saw numbers go up and down depending on whether you were told to stay home and lock down or open up or come in, and so there was different things that happened with that. But and we just adapted the programs as best as we could, as much as we were allowed to. We follow under congregate care living guidelines through HS as well, so making sure that we can offer as much as we can that people feel safe with, to make sure that people know, even if you have COVID and you have symptoms, please still come into the shelter, has been our message for the past 21 months. We have an isolation unit, we can figure it out, but we'd rather people come in and be safe, especially if it's life and death. So Family Violence Month is an important month to us, obviously, because we just like to bring awareness to the issue. My message to people this month has been, please check on people. We haven't seen people very much during these 21 months. We're not sure what's going on. We tend to say everything is because of COVID, but the truth is that people are out there and people are hurting and they need help. So reach out, reach in, try to help them as you can. CMHA has a great, where Sandra has a great message about it's okay not to be okay, and I think it's important to, we just want to make sure that people understand that it's okay to say I'm struggling and I could use some help, and then you could be an advocate and be a champion and say, hey, this is what I know about the programs and services that are available at the shelter. Let me help you make that call, or let me take you over there, whatever it looks like, and just make sure that people stay as safe as possible during these times. So is that all I have? Good. I'm waiting for another slide to make sure I didn't miss anything. I'm open to questions if I have time for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions? Councillor Hyder? I apologize, didn't see the list here. Councillor Hirsch.
Thanks, Your Worship, and
Thanks,
thank
Dan.
you for the gift, I think, a couple years back, but I always look forward to having you guys come and educate us as you go. Natasha and the new president, congratulations, Jen. But, you know, question, and you and I've gone back many years, but I just need to understand, like, so I read your message. Everyone in the social service field is hurting right now. But from a funding perspective, and I know you get contracted, I believe, still through the province. So is there any kind of emergency funding that got brought forward? Is there any type of, because your numbers are increasing. I think from a capacity standpoint, you're either bursting at the seams or you're always at it. So is there any kind of dialogue that you have with the province, and is there something that we could do to assist or anything in that regard, Natasha?
Thank you for that, Councillor Hirsch. Yeah, we do go way back to our frontline days, so thank you for that. Yeah, we did. We were able to receive emergency funding through the province and federally COVID dollars that helped us offset things like shields and, you know, extra things that we needed to buy, and we had to hire staff to help because staff couldn't serve food anymore, just things like that you don't think about. So we were lucky to have some money from that in that capacity for sure. We are bursting at the seams. Yes, this is true. Sometimes I think we need to build up and build another floor, and then I think sometimes, oh my gosh, like I don't want to keep sheltering people. I want people to be able to be safe in their own home. So it's a bit of a catch-22, to be honest with you. I want people to have a safe place to come. When I started at the shelter 15 years ago, it was an 11-bed shelter. Now we're at 30 beds in that same space, and I keep thinking, surely that's enough space. Then we build a second stage shelter with 10 townhouse units, and there you go. And then we start outreach services, and they have caseloads through the roof right now. And so, yeah, like I don't know if it's so much about funding, and I'm a charity and I shouldn't say no to money ever, but I think that it's more about awareness of the issue and figuring out how we can support people and figuring out what the kind of help we can do. As a system in Madison Hat, we work really well together, and so we have great relationships, like I said, with food bank and community housing, community mental health, and so we do have those kind of great connections that we can pick up phones and figure out what best services are needed for people, and I think we do a pretty good job of that part, at least.
Councillor Dumanowski.
Your Worship, I want to thank you for your presentation. Reflecting back to a year ago when you were here and we were talking about some of the immediate impacts of COVID, and again, it's been said many times, and it probably will be for the foreseeable future, but I know there were some gaps and I don't want to mischaracterize, but there were some concerns about gaps maybe being identified for support because of the hard lockdown that was occurring, you know, a year and a bit ago. But we're living under different conditions, so I'm happy to hear that people are getting access and that you have all those partnerships. And I written down here, your partnerships pros, really, when it comes to setting up these initiatives. You made mention of SFIT with Chief McGrogan, who now gets to be sitting around this table. So I was on the commission when that was brought forward by the chief and you guys as partners in that. And so my question then is, because it was very comprehensive, even though it was a short presentation, was, is there a biggest or growing concern that you would like to see mitigated? I mean, all of your concerns are valid and probably have equal weighting, but is there one trend that is kind of standing out that is of great concern, that is kind of creating the need for additional resources, both human resources and financial resources?
I think if you asked my frontline staff, they would say it's mental health and addictions. Addictions from mental health or health, back and forth, whatever it is. But that's basically what we're seeing. And I think that some of what we're struggling with is we can't even get to some of the family violence stuff, like to talk about safety planning and things like that, because their mental health is at such a state, and they've been sort of carrying on in this state of sort of, trauma and crisis for so long. We always talk about cortisol levels being through the roof. And so I think that it's sort of, they're there. And that's where we're struggling. And I think that's where any community agency who will stand in front of you will tell you that's what we're struggling with, is how to support people the best way we can in terms of mental health and addictions, and what can we do to support them in a different way is absolutely, we need more mental health and addiction support is really what we need. We need to be able to refer people to mental health and get them into mental health in a timely way, and have that be ongoing.
Just to end by thanking you for everything that you do, and Peggy as well, sitting at the back there, and your whole organization and your leadership team and the partnerships that you've created and continue to create, as you mentioned a new one today. So our community is definitely better off for it. And again, your commitment to what you do and your passion for it is evident. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Hyder?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm just going to echo Councillor Dumanowski's words of the dedication that you and your team have put in for many years, Natasha. I know you quite well. And, it's something to have this type of organization within our community. We're very fortunate that it is here, as you do service so many people, not just within Medicine Hat, but the surrounding area. I wanted to congratulate you on your first day of the DART program. What a wonderful opportunity to work with AHS and have that liaison with each other, and keep up the good work, you guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Natasha.
Councillor Hyder. Thank you. We were super excited about it, because that was definitely, speaking of gaps, a gap we felt like we have great relationships with the hospital, but we just weren't sure that the right questions were being asked, or that we were seeing all the people we could be seeing through Emerge or those kind of departments. We felt the same way at SFIT all those years ago, that we knew that not everybody presented as a domestic, and so, but there was underlying issues that were causing those things. And sadly, it was a homicide at the time that took us to that point that we decided we had to do something differently. So I'm really happy to have an opportunity to fill a gap if we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Natasha.
Can I get a motion to receive this item?
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Thank you so much. We brought you all a little bag, which is our slogan, Growing Hope in the Community. That's our mural that's painted outside of Station Coffee. So just keep that in mind. That's what we're just trying to work so hard to do, is make sure everybody has hope. Thank you.
Thank you. Vote was unanimous.
So our next presentation tonight is from the Medicine Hat Exhibition and Stampede Lease Committee. We have Rod Edwards here, Ross Brigden, and Bob Thompson. And the background for this lease item is item 9.3.7 in your packages.
Welcome.
Thank you.
You have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor Clark, Council. We appreciate the time to be able to come into you. It's not where you start, I guess it's where you end. And so a little bit about ourselves. As you know, we've been in our location for pretty well 75 years or better. We're coming off a 50-year lease, and we would like to continue for another 50 years. We have about 800 event days a year that we do on the grounds. We generate about $14.5 million in a year, and that came off an economic impact study we did in 2019. And we would like to continue to operate for the next 50 years. I would like to thank Mr. Nicolay, who's been very helpful throughout this past year to, I would say, negotiate a new lease that we're happy with, and I believe Mr. Nicolay was. So I'll let the other gentleman speak to you, but I would like to thank you for listening to us.
Well, first of all, I'd like to congratulate Mayor Clark, all the councillors. I'm sure you're going to serve our fine city well. We've been working on this lease with Bob and the rest of the city people for the last 14, 15 months. There's been lots of ups and downs, but like Ron said, we came to an agreement. It's great, and we're happy. I guess that's the reason why we're here tonight, get our lease, show some stability to our organization within our community. The stability is necessary for us to apply for government grants, both federal and provincial, for any projects we might have in the future. If we apply for grants, that's one of the first questions. Do you own your property? Do you have a long-term lease? And at the present time, that's what we definitely want, is another long-term lease. Once again, we'd like to thank everybody for the support. We definitely want the tradition to live on. It's been going on since 1887, and I'm certainly sure that you people will serve the city well and do a great job. Thank you.
Your worship and councillors, I'm Bob Thompson, if you don't know who I am. Our organization has been active in the community for over 130 years. During that time, we've had many partners and projects, from the Canada Senior Games to the partnership with the city in the construction and operation of the field house for recreational and cultural activities. We're looking forward to renewing old partnerships and making new ones, like the upcoming Special Olympics. I guess when you get right down to it, we're both here for the same purpose, to make Madison Haddon area a better place to live and raise our families. We look forward to your trust and support in approval of this new lease. We can then look forward to helping meet the future needs in our community. Thank you very much. And if there are any questions, we would like to answer them for you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Seeing none. Oh, Councillor Sharps.
Hi there, I do have a question. So my question to you, it's been in the same location for 74 years, and at that time it would have been the edge of the city. So now that we've expanded your inner city, does that not serve you to look at a different location that you can expand and grow? I mean, you're kind of restricted. I mean, it's still a big area, but does it not restrict you a little bit?
A good question. So yes, we were there. They moved us from the airport at one point in time. That's where the Stampede grounds were in existence. And then they moved us to where we were today. And you have to remember, the city grew around us. We didn't grow around the city. Number two, with my experience, and I've been in this business a long time, fairgrounds, and I can give you some examples, fairgrounds that have moved from inner city or in the middle of the city to the out to the, they call it the prairie, or to the outskirts of the city, have tended to fail. Reason being, right now, we're the hub of the activity. We're close to the hotels, restaurants, service stations, malls, and that generates a lot of revenue for the community. When we put on an activity, we're in the center. They don't have to seem to drive to the north or the south or out into the outskirts to get there. You look at Calgary. Calgary wants to stay right downtown, right smack in the middle of the city. I can name you a couple, and I wish, well, Grand Prairie is a good example that moved out of the city, out into the county, and they struggle to where the county has to subsidize them every year. I think we've done a very, very good job of not coming to the city to help us continue our operations year to year. So we need to be and want to be right where we're at. We have 90 acres. We use it at some time during the year. We certainly use all 90 acres. Maybe not for one event or this other event, but at some point in time during that year, we use all 90 acres. Does that answer your question? Thank you.
Councillor Dumanowski.
Your worship, thank you, gentlemen, for coming today. Yeah, this agreement has been in the works for quite some time. I want to, I guess, just take a moment to reflect on your contribution, just like we had another presentation. Your contribution different, but what very important to this community. When you think about the history that the Stampede has contributed to this community and area, it's pretty well known and significant. But those kinds of things are important, but it's measured against economic opportunities, and certainly you've expressed and demonstrated that with a $14.5 million impact a year, you're leaving your footprint here. You're contributing, and it is a partnership that the city has enjoyed with you as much as you have enjoyed with the city. I'm a strong believer in what you're doing. I'm a strong advocate in that. I recognize that a 50-year lease, for the former council, and this isn't of short duration, but I also equally understand the need for such a lease in order to capitalize on the opportunities that come with that. And we're looking forward to expansion and growth and development and partnership. And I'll end on, as much as people have differing opinions on these kinds of things, I can tell you that one of the things that I've heard, and I'm sure we all will agree, that contributed to those quality of life indicators for people who are moving to a community like this is culture and recreation and the arts. And you are a huge contributor in all those realms. So I wish you the best, and I'm very happy and hopeful that this council will continue to have that strong relationship with you for the next 50 years.
Thank you.
Councillor Canodal.
Thank you, Your Worship. It's nice to have you here. Thank you for coming before us and sharing your passion with us. It's wonderful to see. Your contribution to the community, obviously, I am significantly younger than many, but I've grown up in Medicine Hat and have spent many of summers at the Stampede grounds, and see the value that Councillor Dumanowski has brought forth. And I also wanted to give you some positive feedback about the evolution that your organization has taken, bringing things like Pride After Dark to our community in times that call for that sort of progress. I think that's really important. I have a question about the evolution of and maybe you can educate me on this, the evolution of perspective towards ethics with animals. Can you teach us a little bit about your approach with the livestock that you work with, horses, and what those preconceived ideas about working with animals in the way that you do? Can you shed light on what your approach really looks like and your relationship with animals with the Stampede?
Sure. Now I'm going to use something that happened to us a few years back. The SPCA out of Calgary sent an officer down to spend a whole day with us at the rodeo. But it's not, we just don't put a rodeo on. We have animals in the petting zoo. We have animals in the 4-H barns. And of course we have the rodeo, full-blown rodeo. They wanted to know how we handle our livestock. So they came down and I happened to be the person to take them about. And we looked at the petting zoos, and our petting zoo's been coming for 30 years. It came out of Ontario. We have just changed petting zoos, so you know. And the shavings that go down, the water, the feed, the shade, the fans that blow on them, that was the first step for them to look at. But what really caught their eye was when we got over to the rodeo grounds, and you must understand, the rodeo stock, the contractors own, they'll pay up to $50,000 or better for a bucking horse. Now think about that. A horse that bucks for 8 seconds and they'll pay over $50,000. So those animals are probably kept and fed better than sometimes our kids. And so when I took them that day, it was 100 above. The dust from the rodeo was, you could see it in the air. And you've got the flies, you got the mosquitoes. But what we had done, we had put up a system of sprinkler systems so that they watered those pens, and it was just a thing we threw together, and we had all our pens sprinkled, and the livestock would walk in and out of that sprinkled, that water, keeping the dust down, number one, and keeping them cool. The officer from the SPCA was so amazed at that we actually got a big write-up in the SPCA journal or monthly bulletin. So if you ever, and I have had the opportunity to take Alderman McGrogan, what they wanted to see was the back end of how we do handle livestock, how we handle everything, I guess, at our fairgrounds at fair time. And I can only tell you that they're first and foremost. And I'd be happy at any point in time to take anybody through how we deal with the animals, whether it be rodeos, chuck wagons, or petting zoo or whatever. Yes, an accident can happen, but it's not because we don't put every safety factor in that we can possibly put in. And I know that question, there's definitely opposition to any animal sport, but we try our best to, the animals are just too expensive and too precious not to have the safety factors put in place. Hopefully that answers that.
Thank you. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Councillor Hirsch?
Well, gentlemen, here we are.
Yes.
It has been 14, 15 months. Those sitting councillors that have been here recognize we've been through it a little bit, and the ups and downs certainly was in play. You know, and I do recognize, and I think the word passion, we talked about it before, Ron, and we were all around the table, and the passion on your side, and certainly the passion that I have as a city councillor. So I kind of hearken this to kind of signing that key free agent to make the team really awesome. And the city medicine hat, you mentioned, team medicine hat is definitely in play. But in some cases, we just have to have that negotiation to make sure that we're all comfortable on both sides. And when I think about 50 years, I reflect on the last 50 years, and we talked a little bit about it. You know, the city's now wrapped around you, and that's been a consideration. The land that you sit on kind of approximately now is cascaded up to worth potentially $15 million. The opportunity cost for the city medicine hat for this $1 lease is nearing close to $500,000 or $500,000 that is an opportunity cost that the city has to forego in order to make it sense for you guys to move forward. And we appreciate absolutely the contributions, and I said this before to you, contributions of the Stampede is obviously 120 years, et cetera, that we don't even have to talk about it. But I think it is important for the citizenry and the public to understand that anytime we engage in lease conversations where it's $1 or otherwise, we need to understand what's certainly the benefit, but what was the contribution in terms of me deciding and my fellow councilors is just as much as the value contribution of the Medicine Hat exhibition at Stampede, but moreover, the contributions of many nonprofits that come forward with a $1 lease. And I just want to make it a point for people to understand that this is a contribution in kind to the Medicine Hat exhibition of Stampede for almost annually $500,000. And I think that's the only thing I want to come across, because the value that this agency brings to our community and our region, quite frankly, because you do pull, is well worth the funds. So I appreciate it. Thanks for your patience and well done. Thank you.
And I thank you for that, and I understand your side of it. I really, really do. I just hope that you'll, the $14.5 million generated each year, I mean, that goes to a lot of businesses to keep them and also to survive. So we feel that it's a partnership. We've had some great partnerships, as Bob alluded to in the past, and I guess we'll continue to have those partnerships. We know our business, we know where we have to be, and we would like to continue. And so I think our past stands for that. And certainly, I know where you're coming from, but we believe we need to be where we're at. So thank you.
Councillor McGrogan?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. As your, I guess, representative, I was appointed by the mayor. I'm going to ask that I make a motion to put bring the decision item forward relating to the renewal of the lease for discussion and vote.
Second.
Sorry, I was on the speaker list, Mayor Clark. I find myself in a conflict of interest in this matter. I'd like to recuse myself. May I have your leave to abstain, please?
You leave granted?
Thank you.
You can.
Okay, so at this time, we're just voting on the motion to bring the item forward. It's unanimous. Are there any further questions on the presentation? Okay, can I get a motion to receive for information?
A motion.
Second.
All right. So now we need a motion to adopt the item.
9.3.7. And that is the approval of the lease.
Need a motion.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
It's unanimous.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, Councillor.
Councillor Hyder?
Thank you, Your Worship. I didn't get an opportunity to thank you, fine young gentlemen, from the Madison Exhibition and Stampede. Thank you for coming. I've only known you a few years, so thanks, guys.
Okay, so our final presentation of the evening is the 2022 budget update. Managing Director Eggert is here, and several members of his team will be giving us an update tonight of the budget. Background information is item 9.3.4.
Mayor Clark and members of council, good evening. And it's my privilege to present to you the 2022 budget update for your consideration, discussion, and approval. This presentation will have a few components to it and elements, namely the following four. The first part of it will talk about the municipal part of our budget, and that's the tax base or the tax revenue piece that's included in the municipal budget. And Lola Barta will be presenting that piece. Invest Medicine Hat, Eric Van Ink, he's, I believe, on Microsoft Teams, and he'll be joining us virtually. The utility, which is the rate base, includes all of our city utilities. Jared Dickey will be presenting that element of the budget. And then lastly, Comco, what we refer to is the commodity base or the commodity part of our business, which includes the oil and gas as well as electric generation, and Travis Chutcher will be presenting that. I do want to acknowledge the time and effort that staff has put towards preparing this budget and the presentation as well. As an introduction, we're currently in a four-year budget period, which is 2019 to 2022. And those four individual budgets of those 4 years were approved by council on December 17th, 2018. At the time, that budget was designed to advance council priorities as was outlined in the 2019 and 2022 strategic plan, and included, among other things, a continued progress on Financially Fit initiative, which we later amended to the Accelerated Financially Fit, and seeking to strike the right balance between those facilities, amenities, program services, and what it would take in terms of taxes and fees and rates to be able to provide those services. We're recommending a budget update for 2022, so just the individual year 2022, for various reasons. A lot has happened over the last 4 years when we put together the management assumptions and estimates, and so we wish to restate those and reflect what we see happening in the environment and in the economy. Secondly, the Alberta government has issued a Alberta Fiscal Plan, which is their overall plan on achieving a balanced budget for Alberta. And along with the Alberta Fiscal Plan has come annual budgets. As part of those annual budgets, what we have seen is a change or reduction in the contributions that they provide to municipalities. Thirdly, a revision of the property tax revenue that was originally approved and contemplated. Fourthly, to reflect the 2021 organizational realignment that was done earlier in this year. And number 5, to establish for 2022 the accelerated financially fit targets and any tax rate stabilization or reserve funding that we would require. As I mentioned, again, it's our privilege to present this, and we're requesting council to consider, discuss, debate, and approve these budgets in advance of the 2022 calendar year. I think it's worth talking about what's going on in other parts of the province. that are impacting us. And I titled this the external environment. And many of this is beyond our control, and many other municipalities and other organizations in Alberta and across Canada are experiencing very similar type of headwinds. The first one, as I mentioned, is a reduced Government of Alberta transfers. And one of our large transfers that we see is grants and subsidies and fee subsidies. And many of these have been looked at and in various stages are being revised or reduced. And so we're seeing pressures on that side. Continued market volatility in many aspects, from inflation to commodity prices to market returns. And not only does it impact the City of Medicine Hat as a corporate entity, but it also impacts every resident in City of Medicine Hat and their ability to participate in city facilities, to pay their utilities and property taxes. Lastly, increased impact and uncertainty of COVID-19. And just when we think we've taken 2 steps forward, it seems like we're taking 1 step backwards. And so that uncertainty around COVID-19 and the impact to us as a municipality is an uncertainty. And that this budget does try to incorporate some of those factors, but it's definitely a headwind for the City of Medicine Hat. I do want to reference the planning cycle that we're currently in the midst of. And the City of Medicine Hat, like many other municipalities, do participate in a multi-year budget process. As I mentioned, the 4-year planning cycle that we're currently in the midst of, 2019 to 2022, does coincide with the council election and the council term. We do have a 1-year offset to allow the new council to become familiar with the issues and allow them to gather for a strategic planning session. But essentially, this council will be asked and will be delivering a strategic plan for the year 2023 through 2026. And with that will come 2 sets of 2-year budgets, and we're moving to a 2-year budget as opposed to a 4-year budget, just for logistics and the ability to estimate some of the assumptions forward 4 or 5 years into the future is becoming more and more difficult. As previous individual years, we have come forward to council for budget updates for 2020, for 2021. And now this particular presentation and request is a budget update for 2022. I did include an illustration just highlighting what the 4-year planning cycle relates to and the budgets related to that, and when the councils are elected. So you can see at the end of 2021, which is where we're currently at, this council was elected and is sort of elected 1 year prior to the expiration of the 2019 to 22 budget planning cycle. I think what is worth highlighting as well as we walk through this budget is what were the original budget assumptions that the previous council had approved in December of 2018, and what are we recommending for this particular budget update as it relates to some significant and major elements of the budget. I will start with property taxes. So originally, back in December of 2018, we were seeing a property tax revenue, which is the municipal piece, of $88 million. What we're proposing, and that related to a 4% increase year over year for a 4-year period. What we're proposing for 2022 is a 2.5% property tax increase, which translates to a $80 million revenue ask on the property taxes. The assessment growth, which relates to new construction, so this is assessment base, which we would collect property taxes on. So the original estimate was a half a percent of assessment growth, and that assumption is holding true for this budget update of a half a percent. Our assessment value for the city is approximately $9 billion. So a half a percent of $500 million is approximately $400,000 to $450,000 of new construction growth. Debt is another element that we follow closely. The original budget was forecasting debt into 2022 of $439 million, and we're revising that to $487 million. That's an increase of almost $50 million, and relates largely to some larger capital projects that have been approved over the last 3 years, including the Unit 17, which is our electric generation facility, as well as the accelerated abandonment and reclamation project with our oil and gas business. The other element is our debt limit, which is legislated through municipal affairs. And so I've been asked the question, how do you know how much debt is enough, and what is the right debt limit for the organization? The debt limit is mandated and legislated through the Municipal Government Act, through municipal affairs, and that limit is 2 times our annual revenues. So our annual revenues are approximately $350 million. This year it's forecasted to be probably closer to $400 million. So in doing the math, our debt limit would be somewhere between $700 and $800 million. So that would be the absolute maximum as it relates to municipal affairs. Our city policy, we've actually taken a lower amount, which is 70% of that value. So when you look at these numbers of, we're proposing a 60% debt limit, that's well within the municipal affairs number, and also well within our City of Madison debt limit policy. I've also been asked, why can't we increase the debt limit and at least utilize debt in a low-interest environment? And we are trying to utilize debt wherever possible. We also have other forms of funding, including grant funding, that we would like to incorporate and utilize as part of our funding plan, as well as anticipating other growth, capital growth, and sustaining capital into the future that we know that we will need this capacity in our debt for. The Accelerated Financially Fit, which has an acronym of AFFI. Initially, we were targeting $7.7 million in this calendar year, and that's more or less what what this budget is disclosing as well. The major difference when you look at the original budget versus this budget is how we're planning on funding that. The original budget had 7.1 of that being funded through a tax stabilization reserve, whereas our updated budget is only showing $2.5 million being funded through a reserve. So the other portion, as Lola will be outlining, is related to looking at potential revenue growth in certain areas, as well as looking at if there's any opportunities to reduce expenditures on the municipal side. Just when you look at the tax revenue, I see a footnote there. The 2.5% tax revenue increase translates to approximately a $2 million increase in our municipal budget revenue. I did take a look at the original presentation that we did back in 2018, and it included some budget objectives which are still holding true, and I just want to go through that. The first one is this budget does allow for and deliver on all our statutory and legislative requirements, and we do have many of those as it relates to our Comco business, our municipal business, our utility business, and so all of those requirements will be supported by this budget. The other one is the delivery of quality services that we provide to residents. So again, this budget does support that. and does allow for the funding of those services. A competitive property tax rates and a utility rate as we compare to other municipalities in Alberta. And later in the presentation, we will illustrate how Medicine compares to other municipalities for an average household for both tax rates and utility rates. And we continue to have a competitive, we continue to remain competitive in this area. Financial sustainability and resilience is an important factor for any municipality, and the resilience part is an important part in being able to bounce back after unforeseen events. And you can think back to COVID-19 as an unforeseen event, and we were very fortunate as a city to be sustainable and resilient to be able to respond to that. And the last one here in terms of our overall objective is to preserve and enhance our advantage as we see it. Again, I have a slide at the end of the presentation that outlines some of the factors that we believe we have an advantage and we want to promote that advantage as a city. So that's it for my introduction, and I see Lola Barda is coming down to the microphone. And Lola will take us through the municipal part of the budget and then introduce the next speaker. Thank you.
Thanks, Dennis. Good evening, Mayor Clark and councillors. So I'm just going to take a brief look at 2021. The COVID restrictions continue to impact our facilities, airport, transit, and permit revenues. We do have cost control and mitigation plans in place, such as the workforce reduction, the organization realignment. We did have reduced training, mainly due to COVID, and we've experienced higher investment returns, and that's really related to our long-term investments performing better than expected. The 14.8 financially fit target is expected to be met, and that was really through the workforce reduction, the organization realignment, facility closures, transit on demand, and the fleet reductions. Within the 2021 budget, we did budget to utilize 7.8 million of the reserve funding in order to get a balanced budget. We will be looking at that amount as we get closer to year end, and that will be adjusted accordingly. So with that, we are expected to have a balanced budget at the end of the year. And we do have dedicated staff who are continuing to look at innovative solutions and improvements across the organization. So as Dennis mentioned, Council did approve a 4-year budget in December 2018. However, due to changes that have occurred since then, we are coming forward with a budget update to request adjustments on a few major items. And I'll just highlight a few of those items here. So property tax revenue, we are recommending a 2.5% increase, and that's really to align with the longer-term CPI average. We feel that the community is still recovering from the COVID impact, and so we don't think that there's a capacity for a higher increase at this time. The 2.5%, as I mentioned, really follows the targeted inflation for Alberta. And we also looked at what other municipalities were doing across Alberta, and they are recommending adjustments anywhere from a 0% to 3%, so we feel that we are within that range. We are also recommending a 0.5% assessment growth. And I just want to note on this, Dennis had mentioned that property tax revenue is about $80 million, and so a 2.5% increase on $80 million is $2 million. Our expense base is $120 million, and 2.5% increase inflation on that is $3 million. So as you can see, the 2.5% increase in tax will not cover the inflation amount on the expense base. In wages and salaries, we're recommending a 2% increase. The QP contract has been settled, and it was settled at 0% for 2020 and 2021, and a 2% increase in 2022. We've also incorporated some operating adjustments, and those were mainly due to the reorganization. So the voluntary and involuntary staff reductions and related interdepartmental allocations. We've also incorporated the AFFI, or Accelerated Financially Fit initiatives, and these were related to the permanent mitigation efforts. As Dennis mentioned, we've also determined a new target for 2022, so that's 7.6 million, and we're looking to fund that through 2/3 from revenues and expenditures, and 1/3 from our reserves. Some of the other changes that have resulted in the budget were the changes in the operational models. So we did adjust for the co-op place, the senior center, and transit on demand. We have not made any changes due to COVID. So the uncertainty with COVID, it's really hard to forecast what our capacity levels are going to be as we move into the next year. So the only changes that we made were if they were permanent in nature. So one example would be the airport revenue. So we know that Air Canada will no longer be flying out of Medicine Hat, and so that adjustment has been reflected in the 2022 budget. So this next slide is high-level overview, and it shows the 2021 approved budget update compared to the 2022 proposed budget update. I'm really going to focus on the dollar change column, and I'll just go through a few items that have impacted those numbers. So revenue have increased 7.1 million, and that's mainly due to the property tax increase of 2.5%, plus the 0.5 assessment growth. We've also have increased investment income, and that's to align with our investment strategy. As well, we've incorporated 2.6 million in increased investment, increased revenue, and that was, as I mentioned, in order to fund that gap. So we're looking at 1/3 that's going to be funded through our revenues. And that is really we're looking at a few opportunities here, some development incentives and growing the property tax base. On the expense side, we see a 4.6 million change, and that increase is related to the 2% increase in salaries and wages, plus the strategic manpower adjustments and the 2021 organizational realignment. Also included in this number is 2.5 million of cost reductions, again, that will be used to fund 1/3 of that gap of 7.6 million. So I just want to make a note of the two items that we have in here of how we're planning on funding this. As I mentioned, staff are continuing to look for innovative solutions to address these challenges, and all of these plans are at various states of analysis and development. And so once we have more information, and for those items that may have a sensitive impact, we will be coming back to committee and presenting this as information for review as appropriate at a later date. Internal transfers, this is a net number, and it's reflecting a net a net revenue position. It's $2 million increase, and I do have another slide that I will go into a little bit more detail on this coming up, so I'll just leave that one for now. Capital requirements, we have a increase of $800,000, and this is just the funding related to the capital, so an increase of $800,000 from our operating funds. The transfer from to reserves, this is showing a net transfer to reserves, and you can see that it is a decrease. This means that there is less reliance on the reserves, and the biggest piece of this is that reduction in what we're funding the gap with. So as Dennis had mentioned, we're looking at $2.5 million to fund the 7.6 million, so 1/3 of that gap. Okay, so just looking at internal transfers. So what are internal transfers? They are the distribution of costs in recognition of services provided to the operational departments. And so why do we do this? Well, we provide corporate-type services to our operational divisions. And so those divisions need to reflect the costs of those services received. You can see that the arrow of the transfers are going both ways. The majority of the transfers will happen from the corporate-wide services out to the self-sustaining and other operating divisions. And so why did internal transfers increase by $2 million? Well, part of this was the 2% increase in salaries and wages. And the other piece of this was mainly due to the reorg. So prior to the reorg, positions were embedded in the operational divisions. And with the reorg, we have moved to a more center-led approach. And so these positions are now reflected under corporate services, and we are now recovering for those costs through the internal transfer process. So the operating divisions will see a reduction in their salaries and wages and an increase in their internal transfer. This next slide really just highlights the key changes that have happened in what I've mentioned. So I'm just going to go back past that one. So property taxes, again, as what was mentioned previously, when we did the 4-year budget, council did approve a 4% increase over all 4 years. In 2020, we came forward with a budget update, and council approved a 3.5% increase. However, due to COVID, council did approve a one-time assistance package of $3.9 million, which resulted in a 0% tax revenue increase for that year. In 2021, we came forward again with a budget update, and council approved a 0% tax revenue increase. We did need a one-time contribution from the reserve of $800,000, and that was to fund the market losses that were incurred in that year. And that was in order to keep us at a 0% tax increase. So in 2022, we are requesting a 2.5% property tax increase, and that is a decrease from 4% originally approved. So accelerated financially fit, this was implemented to reduce the reliance on the energy divisions and the reserves. So in 2021, we had a budget gap of $22.6 million. We've achieved 14.8 of that through our AFFI initiatives, and 7.8 would be funded through the reserves. In 2022, our budget still identifies some challenges. So we are looking at a 7.6 budget gap. And as I mentioned previously, we're looking to fund this 1/3 through revenues, expenses, and reserves. And the amount from the reserves is $2.5 million, and so we are looking to reduce that reliance on the reserves as we move forward. So the tax rate stabilization reserve, I just wanted to highlight a few things here. The green bars are the contributions, and in 2019, it looks like we have a large amount in there. Part of that $36 million, we did have a one-time transfer of $25 million from the energy division, and that was done to build the reserve for the expected requirements that we thought we required into the future. You can see that the green bars have reduced over the next few years here, and that was due to a change in our dividend policy and the contributions that were coming from the utilities and energy division. The purple or pinkish bars are the transfer to municipal operations, and so as we implemented financially fit, as well as the accelerated financially fit in 2020, you can see that there's a reduction in the requirement from the reserves over the 4-year period. Oh, and just to mention, so you can see that the balance in the tax rate stabilization reserve is remaining fairly flat from 2021 to 2022. If we are not able to solve the gap through increased revenues or decreased expense reductions, then there may be more reliance that we would need to utilize the reserve to fill that gap. So we are requesting a small increase to the 2022 capital budget. Just one item here, $23,000 for police services, and this is 100% funded through a third-party contribution. This is a new project, and so it does need to be approved through council. And I just want to touch on the debt to revenue ratio. Dennis has gone through this a little bit. This chart shows the forecast as of September 30th. So 2021 and 2022 forecast is at 60%. And so this is below our city policy of 70%. As well, it is below the MGA limit. So as was mentioned previously, the debt limit is a formula prescribed by Municipal Affairs. It is based on 2 times our revenue, and it does not take into account any of our investment holdings. Some of the major borrowings that have occurred in 2021 and into 2022 are related to Unit 17 and the abandonment program for the oil and gas assets. So when we are looking at our funding options, we do take this ratio into consideration to ensure that we are within policy and within the MGA limit, and that we are really looking to optimize all of our funding sources. And so our recommendation is that City Council approve the 2022 Municipal Operations Operating and Capital Budget Update. And I will take any questions at this time.
Are there any questions? Councillor Dumanowski?
Thank you, Lola. Great presentation and very transparent and very clear for the viewers at home or in the audience. There are a number of things I could speak to, but I think the one question that a lot of people would have, especially as it relates to the debt total and ratios is, and I know the answer, but I will ask it for the sake of getting that on public record. The ratio of municipal debt versus debt associated with Comco and the utilities. I know historically, I mean, we're well under the city debt ratio that we've set for ourselves, and certainly what the province sets for us, but can you just clarify what our municipal debt percentage is relative to the rate side, the utility side? And the reason I bring that up is because in the utility world, no different than any other private or public sector utility, their debt ratio would be disproportionately higher as it is for us. And albeit we're working in a climate that's very less stable than it has been certainly in the past, but it's becoming more predictable of late. Just want to clarify that on the municipal side, that we're still holding true to that relative percentage, which has been consistent since I've been here. So as I see it, and maybe my math's not correct, it's about 10%, give or take, of the total debt. Is that correct?
Yeah, through the chair to Councillor Dumanowski, you are correct. It's remained fairly stable. The chart that I showed was, in 2017, was around 13%, and it has actually decreased over the years, and that's a percentage of the overall debt, the municipal portion as it relates to the overall debt. I'll just go backwards here if I can. Or not. No, okay. So, yeah, it's was 13% in 2017 and actually decreased to about 6%. So it has been declining as a portion of the overall debt. As I mentioned previously, we do take a look at all sources of funding. Debt is one of those sources. We do have grants that we utilize, and we do use the grants on the municipal side. More of the debt is related or is utilized on the rate-based side of things.
Just supplementary, the other point maybe to have added interest or questions around would be the moving from a 4-year budget cycle to a 2-year. I know we're in the last year of that, and you summarized it as being allowing us to have a more prudent and more accurate targeting when it comes to our budget, setting our budgets. We will still look forecast to 4 years, but we will set a 2-year budget, which I've been here long enough to see that pendulum come and go. So I'm happy to see that, and I believe it will yield more accurate, more stable budget lines year after year, as has been witnessed in the last few years, many of which those changes were born out of council's need or desire to make changes in relation to COVID. But I'm happy to hear that. The other part of the debt, going back to that, you had mentioned that there were a couple of reasons, and if people are seeing things and certain things are their attention's gravitating towards certain things, like the total amount would be Unit 17, which the total cost I don't have at the top of my head, but is significant. But and the advanced reclamation, both of those will have additional costs associated with them, which increases our debt in the short term, but will have a significant impact on our ability to increase our opportunities within the city proper. And anytime we move down that venture of adding another unit, it has to have a business case for it. So I guess I'm answering the question I'm asking you, but were there, other than those two items, were there any other factors that may have contributed to that larger deviation or number change from what we had proposed to be our total limit for this year 4 and what it actually is? Unit 17 and the reclamation were the two big ones?
Correct, yeah. Those were the two larger items. And we did have another item for the water treatment residual handling plant as well. It was around 7 million or so. So that also attributed to the increase in the debt for the rate-based side.
One last point, as that debt ceiling is identified, people need to know, because this will garner their attention, things come off, things fall off as we go, and so we are in a pretty good position, and we're not in an election year, so I can say that without it sounding political. We are in a fairly stable and predictable position. I'm very encouraged by our AFFI initiatives, and we're continuing to do more. We're not there yet, but I'm quite, having been here for a while, I'm quite excited by the prospect of us weaning ourselves to a point where we're going to be in a stable position going forward. That was unimaginable not so many years ago, and it's just around the corner. So thank you for your department's hard work.
Thank you.
Councillor Sharps?
I have two questions, and I apologize because one of them is going to make me sound really dumb. That's okay. So first, I appreciate the 2.5% increases versus the 4 as a homeowner, very grateful. But you also stated there's a 0.5 assessment growth. Can you tell me what that is?
Yeah, so as Dennis mentioned, that is really based for where we see the market. So if there's new construction that's happening in the city, that's what that would be related to.
Thank you. And then I had one last question. When we talk about AFFI and reorg, voluntary and involuntary, do we know actually what the actual headcount reduction was?
Yes, we do. I'm probably not going to get this correct. I think it was around 30 more. Sorry, I don't have the number off the top of my head. I would have to get back to you on that.
I would love that if you don't mind. So I would be interested in both the FTE, the full-time and the part-time, and what that looks like from a numbers point of view. Because I get the impression pre-election that a lot of our AFFI was headcount-based, so I would love to see those numbers.
Okay.
Councillor McGrogan?
Thank you for the presentation, very informative. I just have two questions and one comment, I guess, more or less. The fourth slide was, Mr. Eggert mentioned that there was a reduction in government grants. Do we have a quantifiable number of what that reduction is, or a close guesstimate? That'd be my first question.
Sorry, I don't have that number off the top of my head, but we do have that number, so I can get that to you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. To build on Councillor Dumanowski's comments around the reduction to a 2-year operating budget, I also want to applaud that. In my previous life, it was very difficult to look 4 years down the road on an operating budget. So I think you're doing future councils probably a favor. I know it's more work, but it's much more accurate to shrink that number. So I just want to applaud that. And the last question I have, and again, it might be something you'll have to get back to me on slide 14, you mentioned the $3.9 million one-time, I don't know, what was it called again?
COVID
that giveaway?
assistance package? Yeah.
Right. How would our budget have been impacted if that wouldn't have happened? Or would it be? I guess so if that 3.9 wasn't kind of, the one-time assistance package wasn't presented, do we know, and again, I don't probably expect you to answer that right away, but what would it change about what we're discussing tonight around increases or decreases?
I'll pass that over to Dennis.
Managing Director Eggert?
Okay, through the chair, and it's a great question, and I wonder if you can just advance to that slide that shows the property tax from the 4 down to the 2.5% with a swooping arrow. There it is. What occurred, just in summary again, was 2 successive years of 0 property tax increases. The original budget had contemplated a 4% increase in each of those years. Every percent of property tax increase translates to approximately $800,000. So a 4% increase is $3.2 million. So $3.2 million in the first year, and then another $3.2 million in the second year. So when you look to translate that in terms of lost revenue opportunity or revenue that was reduced because we reduced our property taxes, that's a rough number of quantum of $2 to $2.5 million per year. Or sorry, $3 to $3.5 million per year of revenue.
Thank you, and I should know this as well, just to follow up. So the 3.9 came out of reserve, is that right?
Yes, it did.
Thank you.
Councillor Hirsch?
Thanks, Your Worship. You know, it's interesting in the construction of this budget when you have a standalone slide and it says debt to revenue and et cetera, but that doesn't accurately cover off the full story, as we all know. We ran into a couple different variances in terms of how we approached our debt and how we managed our debt, et cetera. You know, we slayed, quite frankly, a huge dragon 4 years ago. It was very daunting. And when 66% of the budget is labor, it's the elephant in the room. And I certainly understand, you know, looking back in terms of rearview mirror analysis, and I think what's important to understand is something had to give financially for us, because there's no way a taxpayer would accept a double-digit or significant increase to taxes. So I think, you know, there's been certainly some tough decisions that were made. But what I'm more interested about, and maybe you can explain why I'm comfortable, is because we employed a tactic called arbitrage. When you take a look at the debt and you turn around and say, geez, our debt's getting up there, what that doesn't tell you is what we've actually made that decision to keep the debt there in lieu of the investments that we have. And maybe, well, can you explain a little bit about what tactics we used in the past? Because I think Councillor Dumanowski was saying, like, was there any changes? Although we've had that for a long time, this council might not be aware of what strategic decisions were made.
Yeah, so, sorry, through the chair to Councillor Hirsch, could you just repeat the question just so I?
Just in regards to the tactic that we use to keep our investments where they were, to drive better investment growth, and relatively speaking, keep the lower interest rate debt that we could have quite frankly paid off, but we chose to keep because we are winning in the end, quite frankly.
Right, yeah, we did make that decision to maintain our investment holdings at the level that it was at and utilize more debt. We do get a lower interest rate because we are a municipality, so we do take advantage of that. Again, we do look at all the funding sources available and make sure that we're maintaining all the levels in each of those areas. So again, looking at the grants that we're receiving, and then how much debt can we utilize, making sure we're keeping within those limits. But you are correct, we did make a decision in order to maintain our level. We're using some of the investment funding to pay off some of our principal payments and interest on the debt as well. So that was a strategic decision that we made.
And further, the resulting bonus we get, the difference between the interest rate differential and what we pay on our debt versus what we gain on our investments, correct me if I'm wrong, we use some of that money for abandonment and reclamation and some of that stuff that arguably would have came from the ratepayer, the taxpayer, whatever pocket you want to grab from. So I think, you know, I really do applaud, you know, the wisdom of administration and council back in the day to make that decision, because it is paying off. We're headed financially into a better place, quite frankly, earlier than what anticipated because of some very maybe shrewd maneuvers back how many years ago. So that I just wanted to highlight that, because again, when you look at that snapshot of that slide in by itself, it doesn't tell the story where we could almost write a check, quite frankly, and clear a lot of that up off the balance sheet, and we just choose not to. I do have a question when we get to our audit meeting in the week, I think this Friday, just talking about where we think our crystal ball is heading in interest rates. Does that change where we're headed, et cetera? And you don't have to answer that, Lola, but I'm just giving a heads up maybe if that's a discussion I'd like to go down. Thank you.
Thank you, Lola. I have a question. So building on Councillor Hirsch's comment, I assume we're still making more or earning more interest on our reserves than we are paying on our borrowed money. Can you explain the math of why we are drawing from reserves instead of borrowing at this point?
Yeah, so again, just really keeping in mind the strategic decision of how do we utilize our funding going forward. So if we were to utilize all debt type funding, that would impact our ratios here and either put us over the city policy limit or get us closer to that MGA limit. And so we want to be aware of where that limit is and planning for the future, because we know that we're going to utilize debt into the future and making sure that we're going to maintain that, you know, down 10 years. So we don't want to just use all debt, and if we don't have grant funding or any of that, we know that we can increase our earnings on our investment income. So it does make sense to keep that invested right now and try and utilize as much debt as possible. But again, we do want to look at those ratios and not only on the municipal side, but also on the energy side and rate-based. So we want targets. We don't want to be fully leveraged with debt. We want to have a balance.
My understanding, though, is that we could pay off that debt at any time.
We could with penalties that would be imposed. So if you do pay it off, you will incur penalties because if we've taken that loan out for 20 years, there would be penalties associated with that if we paid it off within 2 years.
I guess I just am not, if we have the money in the bank that we could use in the future, I guess I'm not understanding the analysis that you're using to determine where we want to be for the future in terms of our ratios.
If I might, the intention on the arbitrage.
Councillor Hirsch?
Sorry. The intention on the arbitrage was, quite frankly, and why we didn't use all the funds, nor did we use all the debt, as Lowell indicated, is that we want to strike a balance. At the end of the day, we just want to make sure that there's contingency available if we had to go out and get some debt. Right now is an environment that it's arguably a little bit of a winning formula that we're employing right now. Who's to say where interest rates are headed? Who's to say where the investment climate is? But what I really like about it is that we are nimble enough to look at tactics that as a banker we employ. I've got clients that are doing the exact same thing. And it's a winning formula until such time that it isn't. So this is not going to be a forever thing. We aren't going to be in the land of low interest rates forever. The Bank of Canada is already signaling in the middle of next year, they are going to likely do some hikes. So it may be time, and that's where we would maybe unwind some of that stuff. And don't forget, as Councillor Dumanowski indicated, a lot of these loans are not all the loans are out for 20 years. We have a laddered amount of debt, so some of this debt will come due, some of it will be paid off, and that's, again, we just have to be dynamic how we manage our debt and our investments.
Thank you, Councillor Hirsch. What I'm trying to get at is how did you arrive at what is the math? How did you arrive at that balance?
Yeah, so we have target debt to equity ratios that we try and maintain in all of our areas in each of our divisions. So that's what we try and focus on and try and target those ratios.
How do you arrive at the targets?
Using industry standards.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councillor Hirsch?
Asked and answered, thanks.
Councillor Robbins?
I want to thank you for your presentation and just make sure I understand it. I like to simplify things for myself whenever I can. So can you just walk back with me through time? I'm going to repeat what you said in a way I understand, and you tell me if I'm wrong. So back in 2018, the budget was approved. We're reviewing the 2022 part of the budget the last year. And the budget was approved with a 4% tax increase then, and you're asking us to reduce it now to 2.5%. Okay. And then in 2019, there was an anticipated shortfall. What was that from? Just natural gas prices or a combination of things?
Sorry, in 2019, the shortfall with the tax rate?
Well, there was an anticipation that there would be a shortfall, and that's when that tax stability fund would receive that big chunk of money of 25 million. So so right there, the
This
big
chart.
green, we all like the big green, Lola. So looking back at the big green, $25 million went into that account. I'm guessing, I wasn't on council there, but I'm guessing that part of the theory of that was that the next few years weren't going to be very good, and we needed to make sure that the taxes didn't go crazy in the meantime, and we had something in the fund to rely on.
Yeah, through the chair to Councillor Robbins. We were anticipating, so this was when we had the financially fit initiatives in place. We were not really at the accelerated financially fit position that we were in. So we were expecting that in order to balance our budget, that we would utilize more from the tax rate stabilization reserve in order to help fund the loss in the contributions from the energy division. And so that was the reason for that one-time contribution of the 25 million.
And so this year, what you're telling us, Lola, is good news. We thought we were going to use 14.8 million. That was the gap, and it's actually, my math isn't great. I'm a lawyer, not an accountant, but half, not quite half, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, you go ahead.
Yeah, so the 14.8, so in 2021, we had the 22.6 million gap, and we solved 14.8 of that, which means that there was less reliance on the reserve. We only required 7.8 million to balance our budget. So now in 2022, because we've resolved quite a few things moving forward, our budget gap is really only 7.6 for the 2022 budget cycle.
And that's after the Accelerated Financially Fit Initiative changed that bigger number into something smaller.
Correct, yeah.
Will it continue to shrink with Accelerated Financially Fit?
That is our intent. So on this chart here, where we're showing that we're looking for 2.6 in financially fit initiatives through revenues and 2.5 through expenses, we are looking at opportunities to reduce that gap. And if we can, we would even reduce it further if possible. So it's going to depend on the items that we identify as we move forward here.
So if things keep going well in a year or two or maybe 3, there'll be no reliance on that tax reserve
Correct.
at all?
Yes.
Okay, so this now leads me to the bigger question. And I suppose I struggle with this philosophically because what you're asking us to do is reduce a 4% to a 2.5%. But I'm struggling a bit with the 2.5%, to be honest, to say we've got this tax reserve funding. I think COVID as a pandemic is the crisis of our lifetime, and what is a rainy day fund for but moments like this? So that's what I'm struggling with, and I think looking at the future past this year, what you think this bar graph will look like in 2023. I know it's not, you're not going to lay it out for me just yet, but just to understand how much is that orange gap going to shrink up, and where is that 2.5% going to go in the future? That might be unfair to me to ask, but I'm struggling with the 2.5% when we have this large reserve that we only put in 2019 for moments like this. That's what I'm struggling with.
Okay, and great question. So as I mentioned, we're really trying to reduce our reliance on the reserves. If the 2.5% does not get approved, we would utilize the reserve, so that gap would grow bigger. And so with that, if we couldn't solve it through the AFFI initiatives, we would have to solve it by dipping into our reserves and adjusting for that gap.
Sure, and that has a longer term consequence than just my problem with 2.5, doesn't it? Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough, Lola. Thank you
And-
very much. Well, no,
Yeah,
you- no, go
sorry,
ahead. No,
just
go
another
ahead.
point that
Yes,
I just wanted to
please.
make. If we're not keeping up to date with inflation targets, that is only going to get worse as we move forward, right? Because now we are behind, maybe not behind, but we haven't increased property taxes for 2 years. So a third year of not increasing property taxes, that will be another reduction where we're not able to cover the inflationary amounts that are in our expenses. And so that would be a concern moving forward. How do you make that up over time?
Right, because the last 2 years, there was not 4% and not 4%. So I don't want in a year or two for you to say to me, Councillor Robbins, we want 12%.
We're trying to avoid that.
Trying to
Yeah.
avoid, aren't we all, Lola? Thank you very much.
One more question. I think it's in here, but could you remind me, over the previous year in 2021, how much of our budget gap was resolved with increased revenue, and how much was resolved through financially fit, like reductions of expenses?
For 2021? I don't know if I have that figure handy. I would have to look it up for you.
Yes, that would be great.
Okay.
Seeing no more questions, can I get a motion to accept this presentation for information?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, I will pass it on to Eric Van Enck, and sorry, I can't advance anymore. There we go. Okay, I'll just, I'm going to stand here so I can advance the slides for him, and he will be going through the Invest Medicine Hat presentation.
Thank you, Lola, and good evening to Mayor and Council. I'm going to start on slide 21, which is just basically showing where the current expectation for the 2022 budget is relative to a year ago. As you can see on the revenue line, we're expecting roughly a $500,000 increase from $14.2 to $14.7 million in revenue. On the expense line, we have a similar increase of $600,000 from 11.6 to 12.2. And so the resulting change in the EBITDA is slightly less by $100,000 to $2.5 million relative to initial expectations of $2.6 million. Moving to slide 22. This minor variability with respect to our 2022 budget expectations is primarily driven by changes to land sale expectations. The updated land forecast, land sales forecast rather, has increased revenue expectations by $164,000, while increasing the cost of land sold by $782,000. The balance of the variance for the current budget relative to a year ago is being driven by a change in internal recoveries. And the final point I'd like to make on this slide is that the $780,000 increase in cost of land sold is being partially offset by an expected reduction to salaries of approximately $370,000. And I can, so this is, I guess, the recommendation that Council approve the 2022 IMH operating budget, and happy to answer any questions before passing it over to Jared Dickey.
Are there any questions? Seeing none. Oh, Shyla, or Councillor Sharps.
Yeah, is there any way we can postpone this particular budget to have more information on?
We could get a motion to postpone. Are you wanting to postpone the presentation or the adoption?
Well, I'm not really sure.
Okay.
How's that for an answer?
Yeah.
So I have some questions that aren't in here, and I think that they're questions that need to be tabled. So I don't think this is the avenue to do it right here. I'm not sure, so I'm asking.
Okay, so I would suggest, Angela, maybe we would postpone item 9.3. Which one is that? 3?
Point of order, Your Worship. What Councillor Sharp's asking for is, I would invite for her to make a tabling motion to postpone this to another date and time. The only challenge with that is that tabling motion has to be voted on by all of council and approved. So just wanting to know if we're going to do that.
That's what we're just discussing.
Thank you, Mayor Clark. Okay, so I guess there's a couple of questions here. Did you want to continue with the presentation, receive that for information? And then when we get to the items on the agenda, then make a tabling motion to postpone those to another date? Or did you just want to stop here and then postpone and then bring back the presentation and the items at a later date?
So I think, if Eric would like to continue, that'd be okay, but either way, I'm going to request that. So if he was open to just tabling it till the next council, that would be great.
So the presentation and the items.
Is there, Angela, can you clarify?
May I make a suggestion?
Please.
So we do have a couple of other presentations coming with this particular, for budgets, the utilities and city assets. So how would you feel about just hearing the presentations and asking questions, and then once we get to the item 9.3, the motion would come at that point?
Sure.
Okay.
May I ask a question? to the
Yeah, you
chair?
got to put your name on the list. Councillor McGrogan.
Yeah, and again, I'm just curious, this is just for first reading, correct?
Just a point of order. So we have the presentation, which generally we receive for information. And then item 9.3, we have 4 items there for adoption, which are budget related. Flowing from those, on the energy side, we then have our rate bylaws. So if council does decide when we get to it that they want to postpone all of the budget items, then I would suggest we also postpone the reading of the bylaws, because the bylaws are based on the budget.
Just a point of clarification, Your Worship, that's only necessary if all of the budgets need to be postponed. What I was hearing was a particular concern on item 9.3, which is the Invest Medicine Hat budget. So the rest of the budgets, when we come to them, as you pointed out in the agenda, can be approved, and first reading of the enabling rate bylaws can occur whilst tabling the Invest Medicine Hat budget itself. The two are not related.
Learning in action. Love it. All right. Mr. Dickey?
Thank you and good evening. Mayor Clark and Council, thanks for the opportunity to speak tonight. I'm Jarrett Dickey. I'm Manager, Municipal Services Business Support, and I'm here to present the rate-based utility budget update. So the rate-based utilities focus on the city operations area, which includes electric distribution and gas distribution, as well as city assets, which includes water, sewer, and solid waste. As mentioned earlier, there's rate bylaws associated with that, and to be implemented for January 1st would require first reading tonight. So understanding utility rates. There's a lot of words on this slide. I'll kind of paraphrase and give you a bit of rate making 101. So the utilities that we're presenting tonight are regulated by the Alberta Utilities Commission. And so we are able to make a rate of return on those utilities, but it is regulated. So we do a calculation based on a deemed debt to equity ratio, as well as a deemed return on those assets. But it is really just to sustain the utilities, to make sure that we have the cash necessary to employ the maintenance, the capital investment, to make sure that those necessary utilities are delivered safely and reliably to our customers. So the Energy Division isn't exempt from the AFFI initiative as well. We did go through a significant cost containment exercise, and so you'll see that through the utility rates. Some of the rates that we had projected in our 4-year plan have changed. And so when I get to the slide that walks through those changes, we're comparing from 2021 to 2022 rates. We did do a 4-year budget and forecasted those rates for this term. And as part of the budget reset each year, we go back and review any changes in OPEX or capital spending that have occurred, whether it's a change due to timing, we couldn't deliver capital projects on time, or we actually reduced our capital spend as part of the corporate ask. But the rate increases are typically driven by inflation, similar to our property taxes. Regulatory changes, whether it be Alberta regulatory or federal regulations that require us to meet those. Aging infrastructure, As you probably all witnessed this summer, you couldn't drive down very many streets in Medicine Hat without having to go at least down one detour or multiple detours. So that's part of the asset management program that our deep utilities have gone through. And also part of our examination is examining consumption levels. So obviously COVID and the pandemic have had an impact on our assumption growth and our customer growth that we had assumed in the 4-year budget plan. So we did take a look at that as part of this budget reset. This slide shows us how we compare to the 4 other municipalities that we compare to across Alberta. And so we're comparing, and this is cumulative, but it does exclude the natural gas and electric commodity portion. But we are comparing Medicine Hat, our proposed 2022 rates, to the current 2021 rates in those other jurisdictions. This chart shows our 2021 rates compared to what we're proposing for 2022, and this is using an average residential customer. So what we typically see, each customer will be impacted differently, but this is a typical 30-day billing cycle using an average of our customer base for consumption. So on the electric side, we're looking at or requesting a 1.16% increase. Which is lower than we anticipated as part of that reorg. There was some savings within the utility distribution system group. On the natural gas side, we're actually requesting a modest decrease of 1.157%. On water, was status quo from what we had forecast previously of 1% increase. On sewer, when we originally did our 4-year plan on the sewer side, it was actually a 9% increase year over year for 4 years. As part of the capital reset, as well as the organizational changes, we actually were able to reduce that to 5.25%. And that is a big portion of that is related to flood mitigation efforts. As you're aware that in 2013 we experienced unprecedented flooding, and we did have to do some significant investment in some lift stations. So there's 3 new lift stations built. We do, and as I mentioned earlier, the asset management plan that is in place to renew our aging infrastructure, that all goes into the rate base as part of that calculation. And then on solid waste, a modest increase of just under 1%. So to look at the total bill, we're looking at approximately 1.5% increase to an average residential customer. And again, that excludes the commodity piece for gas and electric, as well as the federal carbon levy. On the rate base, so the EBITDA for city assets, a modest change, a slight increase of 0.7% or $0.7 million of 2.7%. And that just as a result of changing in capital investments. We did recognize a carbon revenue as well as the compost facility that we weren't recognizing earlier. On the city operations side, which is our gas and electric distribution network, increase of 1.4 million, increase of 11.7%. And again, this is just a change in return on and return of capital, as well as operational savings as a result of the organizational restructure. On the capital side, we are requesting 2 modest budget amendments, both at the treatment plant. So at the water treatment plant, to address some bottleneck issues on the intakes of $195,000, and at the wastewater treatment plant, $645,000 to update infrastructure and equipment to meet regulatory and safety requirements at those 2 sites. So as mentioned earlier, there's 2 briefing notes that are coming later in the agenda. One for city assets, which is just the rate portion of that business unit, as well as city operations, which again is just the rate portion of those businesses. Request approval for those budget updates. And accompanying those are 5 bylaws to support the rates to sustain the revenue requirements for those utilities. And I'll open it to any questions. Hopefully they're not as difficult as Lola's.
All right, any questions? Councillor McGrogan?
I think I was getting the look there. Okay, well, I don't know. Okay, I didn't know you could see it there. So thank you. I'm learning. We're a learning in motion group. so I don't think they will be as difficult, but I just have to ask them. The 3 new lift stations, is that, is there any calculation into the one that was eliminated? Is that 3 brand-new ones, or is it, is it 3 net new, or is it 2 net new?
Through the chair to Councilor McGrogan, I believe they were relocated from previous sites so that they were behind the berm to protect the lift stations from future flood issues.
Oh, okay. I know one was diverted, that's why I was asking, to an existing lift station. So I was just curious if that was one of the 3 new ones, or if that was just an upgraded one, but I guess it's irrelevant to some degree. The other question I had was, we haven't gotten to it yet, but the waste, solid waste was basically itemized as the new rates, but there was no comparative that I saw to the old rates. So I don't know, in relation to solid waste, is it an increase overall? I can't remember. Maybe that's coming in another presentation. Just going to try and find it here. Slide 28. Hold on, sorry. So that slide does show the overall ask on the increase, but there is a slide down below, or information that relates solid waste new rate base, and I'm just wondering, I can't compare it from where it went up or down, unless I've missed it. And I don't want to in front of everybody to try to find it here, because I'm really nervous, but I know it's here. So maybe I'll ask you offline, but I am curious about it.
Okay, for sure. Through the chair to Councilor McGrogan, the rate change for solid waste really relates to the change in the recycling contract. So if you're looking at that, I'm not sure I'm answering your question or not, but the change on the slide where I'm talking about the residential customer, that net difference of, I think it's like 0.8%, 0.87%, that is for, to address the recycling contract changes.
Very excited. I just found it. It's in Appendix D, page 3, bylaw 4687. And again, I'm sure it's not significant, but when I saw number 3, it said tipping fee for waste disposal, and it has the rate listed on the right.
Okay.
And I'm just wondering if that is an increase or a decrease from last year's rate.
The tipping fees were made the same. So it was
Thank you.
$80 a ton. Okay. Yeah, we have left tipping fees unchanged for the last 3 years.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Robbins.
I want to thank you for your presentation. A couple of small things. I live in the floodplain, so I'm very grateful for the new lift stations. Thank you very much, former council, for arranging that for those of us who live there. And I'm surprised to see that the costs, or it's supposed to go up 9%, and you said 5.25 is what you're suggesting now. Again, decreasing numbers always sound good to me. So I just thank you for it. But the other question I had was about the composting facilities making some revenue because of the carbon credit.
Yeah.
Is that something that's going to continue year after year?
Through the chair to Councilor Robbins, that is something that we have asked for an extension. So we do apply, and I think we have an extension for the next 3 years. But it is a credit that we're able to, I guess, apply and receive carbon credits for the composting activities that the city does through their yard waste program and wood chips and that type of thing. It is a bit of internal cycle in the fact that we are able to leverage that and use those to offset our emissions at our power plant. So it is a win-win for the city in the fact that we're self-generating credits that we're able to use and retire with our obligations to the power plant.
Perfect. I found that really interesting. Thank you.
That is excellent news, and seeing no more questions, thank you so much for your presentation and your thoughtful responses.
Thank you. I'll turn it over to Travis now to walk through the Comco budget.
Thanks, Jared, and good evening. My name is Travis Tuchscher. I'm the Manager of Energy Marketing and Analytics with the city. As Jared mentioned, the next part of the presentation will cover the commodity business unit, Comco. It's an interesting time right now in the commodity markets. Natural gas and power prices have risen significantly over the past few years. Typically, this would cause a supply or substitution response in the market. However, the markets are going through a transition due to net zero and carbon implications. On the supply response, this has been delayed or muted until they can understand how this changing carbon legislation will affect the long-term impacts of these long-term assets. For substitution, there are alternatives being developed, such as battery storage, hydrogen, as you've heard, but is years away from these being a true market solution. This market environment is challenging and will require a strategic view on how the city will transition under these market conditions. Next, I'll cover some current activities and opportunities. I'll start by saying we're forecasted to be a positive EBITDA for 2022. EBITDA stands for earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. A few of the financial plan highlights. We're going to continue to execute the shallow gas ARR program that was budgeted in 2020. Continue to execute on opportunities to optimize our operations and facilities while discontinuing uneconomic business activities. Unit 17 was mentioned earlier. We're going to continue to execute this build of our new generation asset to provide an economic return to the city. And also it's worth mentioning our internal oil and gas volumes continue to decline due to dispositions and natural declines. So some changes for this budget amendment. The biggest change is commodity prices. It's been a drastic change since our original budget in fall of 2018, and even since our last amendment in 2021. The change in commodity prices affects our revenues in sales of electricity, and also affects our expenses as gas that we have to buy for our distribution rate base, as well as for our power plant input fuel. So if we look back at 2021 in review, as mentioned, power prices have been the highest since the market deregulated, and this combined with high market volatility has provided increased opportunity for sales to the pool. Oil prices have been stronger due to tightening supply from lower drilling and demand recovery from COVID. Gas prices are trading at the highest level in years as well due to increased demand and stagnant or delayed supply to come onto the market. Looking forward to 2022, we expect the power market to stay strong as the market continues to transition from coal, which has led to periods of tight supply and demand. Volatility increases during these times, which affects our revenue projections. Oil demand recovery has led to a strong oil price forecast as well, and natural gas pricing that has increased in the second half of 2021 is expected to remain very strong through the early months in 2022 and slowly decline as the year goes on. To a close start to commodity prices, and looking at the 2022 amended budget versus the 2021 amended budget, our oil price forecast has increased by 85% from $39.02 to $72.35. The gas price forecast increased by 43% from $2.38 a GJ to $3.42 a GJ. And the power price has also increased by 25% from $58.73 a megawatt hour to $73.42 a megawatt hour. I will mention that these prices are as of September 1st, and since then, both gas and power prices have also increased from that time period. So to looking at our commodity-based operations, I'll highlight, as mentioned, our EBITDA at $55.6 million. That's an increase of $20.8 million from our 2021 budget update. The main change, as I mentioned, commodity prices. On the Comco side, higher prices of electricity has increased our revenues. Expenses have also increased by $60.5 million, which is mainly due to the forecasted natural gas price increase. I would like to mention the note on here that EBITDA funds are used for capital expenditures, abandonment, reclamation, and debt payments. This high performance in 2022 isn't supposed to be an exceptional, strong year and is not expected to sustain over the long term. If I turn to our capital budget, the net change, we're asking for a 10.6 million ask of additional funds for two areas of the business, 6.6 million in capital for developmental drilling in operated assets, and 4 million of sustaining capital for maintenance to equipment and upgrades for regulatory compliance. So lastly, just the recommendation for the City Council to approve the 2022 amended commodity-based business operating and capital budget update. Happy to take any questions that you'd have.
Thank you. Any questions? I do have a question. I have two questions. Can you, on slide 40, can you explain transfers a little more? And then just tell us a little bit more about the developmental drilling you mentioned.
Sure. So for the first piece on the interdepartmental transfers, this one's significantly different than Lola's transfers. This has to do with on our retail books, we set a rate that we're willing to sell to the customers, which we try to set rates that are offered other places in Alberta. If this price is different than the wholesale price, then we have a transfer from the retail book to the operating unit, so back to Genco in this case. So if our sales price is lower than the default rate in the market, then there's a transfer, a negative transfer to Genco, so Genco will have a less revenue on their books.
Okay, I'm still not quite there. So is it a real loss or a loss relative to?
It is a loss relative to a benchmark of a default rate. So it's really just an internal transfer from a retail book to the operating company, but it's the end is what the operating company gets. It's just to track the difference in the commodity, or track the differences in the retail offerings, but it's not a net loss to the operating company.
Thank you. And then developmental drilling?
So this is funds being asked for potential developmental drilling. As of now, there's a few different options that they're looking at or evaluating. When an opportunity comes to fruition, or they feel there's a strong opportunity, we will do an economic analysis, and we will have that approved for that developmental drilling on that certain asset or that certain property.
Okay, any other questions? Councillor Knodel?
So in one of the prior packages, so at one point we were looking at helium and, help me with my language, deep crust drilling. What is the language? Okay. I'm just wondering if the developmental drilling is a different type of drilling than we've done in the past, or if it is pretty much the same as what we have done in the past. Is it a different type?
So that it could be used for either one potential could be looking at hydrogen wells. Another potential could be to look at wells that we exist in, or current properties that we have, and do development on those current assets to improve the output from those assets.
Thank you.
Seeing no more questions, is that the end of the presentation?
Nope, I'll pass on to Dennis, thank you.
My apologies. Thank you, Travis.
Every good baseball game has a closer. And I really appreciate the passion that my colleagues have for their areas, and it does come through in terms of their presentation, so I really appreciate them. I just want to close with a few slides here. I mentioned the Medicine at Advantage, and what does that mean for the city of Medicine Hat? And often we think of property taxes and utilities, but I think there's more to it as we talk about our advantage. And the first one relates to the entrepreneurial heritage or history that we have as a city, and the sometimes the complex business units that we're involved with, and the ability to negotiate commercial terms. And that's one of the advantages that we have over other municipalities, not only having done that for over 100 years, but continue to do that in terms of looking at those opportunities. I want to talk about infrastructure a little bit, and a lot of the assets that we have that you see as you drive through the city are above the ground: roads, sidewalks, light standards. But many of the infrastructure is below the ground in terms of utilities being service to residences and businesses. Well, we do have a well-maintained, I'll say, infrastructure in general, and also reliable. That infrastructure is almost $3 billion for the city from an original cost basis. So there's a lot of infrastructure that we have, but overall it is reliable and well maintained. A safe community. When you look at various measures of where City of Medicine Hat compares to other municipalities, we are a safe community. And we do have emergency and protective services related to fire, 911, and police service as well. Our resources, and when I think about what we have as a city to leverage for economic development, we have land, water, gas, electricity, and those are all things that, resources that we have available to us to leverage economic growth for future generations. A few years ago, we, Council had the vision to create a heritage saving reserve, which is an endowment for residents. The source of the funding for the heritage saving reserve came from, say, excess profits or profits from our utility, from our commodity-based businesses. And the vision was to take that physical asset that we have and convert it to a financial asset, one that would continue to provide returns to the city and help fund the municipal budget. So that's the Heritage Saving Reserve. And the last one is utilities and taxes. And again, we continue to show an advantage in those costs compared to our peers. I do want to highlight this particular slide. And we love this slide. It is issued on an annual basis by City of Calgary. City of Calgary actually surveys and compiles mainly Alberta municipalities, but across Canada, to participate in the survey to show where City of Calgary rates in terms of property tax and utilities. Well, we participate in that as well, and so City of Madison is included. If you look at this slide, this is the combined average property tax and utility charges for a single detached resident in the city. So for City of Medicine Hat, that average would be $5,304. If you look at sort of a comparator that we often look at is Lethbridge. Lethbridge, that number would be $5,962. And when you actually calculate the difference between City of Madison Hat and Lethbridge and multiply it by the number of either taxpayers or ratepayers, so utility customers, it's about 28,000. So that translates to about an $18 million difference, which is significant when you add it together for all the residences. So $18 million less that the residences are paying. You can extend that over to Grand Prairie, where you have a $34 million difference, and all the way to Okotoks, where we calculate a $43 million difference. So the advantage for Medicine Hat is real and evidenced in this analysis. In conclusion, I have 2 slides left. This one is just concluding how I opened up the presentation, that the budgets that have been presented for your consideration do allow us to meet all statutory and legislative requirements. They do preserve the services that we're providing and that are being valued by the residents of Medicine Hat. That we're continuing to provide competitive property tax and utility rates for the residents. That we maintain and are achieving a financial sustainability and moving towards that, which allows us resilience as well for unanticipated events. And lastly, that we are preserving and enhancing the Medicine Hat advantage that I talked about in the previous page. This is my last slide. It does show the journey of how we got to this point and what the next steps are. We did review this, the municipal part in the corporate services orientation. I know that parts of it were touched in some of the other orientations as well. We did go through a special closed council orientation last week to review the budget and answer any questions and process questions and so forth and clarify that. We did take it through administration, our administrative committee on November the 10th, middle of last week. And here before you on November 15th at Open Council is the presentation for your consideration and approval. The next steps, because the bylaws require 3 readings, would be to bring that back at the latest December 20th, but we could go as early as December the 6th, which would allow an advertising period. And then further ask council to approve the 2nd and 3rd readings of the utility rate bylaws. So Mayor Clark, that is my presentation.
Thank you, Managing Director Egert. Are there any questions? I have one. Yep. On slide 44, where we're looking at the Medicine Hat advantage, and I certainly do agree that we have a Medicine Hat advantage. We're an awesome city with beautiful parks and certainly lots of advantages in our community. My question is, do these particular amounts for Medicine Hat include the fixed charges associated with our utilities? It looks like it's just, so it says utility charges, but I'm just wondering, is that all of what someone would see on their bill at the end of the month?
Yes, and all the assumptions are listed in the City of Calgary study, but they do try to equalize, compare apples to apples between the various cities in terms of utility usage, fixed charges, municipal consent and access fee, for example, for those that charge that. And so, yes, it does include those fixed charges.
Any further questions? Oh, dang it. Councillor Dumanowski.
I even pressed the speak button. We're all learning, for sure. The observation I wanted to make, just to touch on the observation of the mayor, and for the public, again, just for illustrative purposes, and it was identified that if we were to benchmark ourselves or calculate our rates and our taxes commensurate with what Lethbridge is charging, we would have $18 million additional dollars. So that's $7.6 million, not entirely, but loosely, if we were just going apples to apples, we would be able to wipe out that $7.6 million delta that we're looking to do in this final year and have 11 and change in the positive. So we're not going to do that. We're going to hold true. I guess I'm bringing that to the public's observation for 2 reasons. One, to demonstrate that despite accelerated financially fit and a number of other things, and are holding zeros the last 2 years for tax increases and a marginal 2.5 increase this year, we are still very competitive, and as illustrated in that chart, one of the most competitive in the country, I believe. So it puts us in a good position, and it kind of just creates a narrative that is supported by previous and current decisions that we will make as a council. And I think Councillor Robbins spoke to that too, that, you know, in a year or two, 3 at the most, we could be completely neutral from that standpoint and have weaned ourselves off that commodity shift that we had embarked on a few years ago. And that's a great storyline for us. It doesn't get us out of the mess yet, but it does suggest some really positive things around the corner.
Councillor McGrogan?
Really quickly, Managing Director Eggert, I just want to commend you on your articulation of the Medicine Hat Advantage slide. It's a nice revised edition, and it made a lot more sense. Thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for your presentation.
Councillor Hyder?
Your worship, and I'm just going to echo Councillor McGrogan's words there. Well done. Very easy for someone like me to understand. So you, Dennis, you and your team did a very good job. Thank you.
Okay, now, seeing no more questions, can I get a motion to accept?
We already have a motion on the floor, which was seconded to receive the presentation for information. So all that's left to do is just to vote.
That is unanimous.
Okay, moving on now to reports. Our first report's item 9.1, Energy and Infrastructure Committee meeting of October 14th, Energy and Review for information. A mover and a seconder, please.
I'll move that.
I'll move, oh, sorry, I'll second.
It's unanimous.
Our next report's item 9.2, Public Services Committee meeting of November 8th, again for information on the committee orientation for fire and the outstanding items.
I move the acceptance of the report.
I second.
Are there any questions on this one?
Item 9.3 is the Administrative Committee meeting of November 10th. This report has adoption and information items. You have already dispensed with item 7, which is the lease agreement. So that comes off the list. So we have item 1, the offsite levy municipal development subsidy for adoption. And then we have the appointment of the temporary license inspector for adoption. And then you have the 2022 Municipal and Invest Madison Hat budget update for adoption, 2022 City Operations Rate Supported Operating Budget Update for adoption, 2022 City Assets Rate Supported Operating and Capital Budget Update, and the 2022 Energy and Infrastructure Division Commodity-Based Business Operating and Capital Budget Update for adoption. And then finally, the City of Medicine Hat 2x14 process for information. Now, going from what we heard earlier on from Council, there is an opportunity to separate out one or more of these budget items to postpone it if you so choose. We need a motion for that.
Your Worship, would it be appropriate to move all the items as indicated first and then look to separating it? So moved.
Would anybody like to make an amending motion to postpone one or more of these items?
Yes, I would. I would like to postpone or table 9.3.3.
Which is the municipal and Invest Madison Hat budget update.
Correct.
Can we get a seconder?
I'll second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll vote.
Was your intent to postpone it to the next meeting, Councillor Sharps? Yeah. I'm going to vote on that then. Seven to two. Yeah.
7 to 2 for postponement.
All right, so that's item 9.33 postponed. So we have items 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, and 8.
Can I get a motion for reception and, to receive for adoption and information?
Your worship, procedurally, did I not already do that? I think we did, and then we made a tabling
Yep,
motion.
so your postponing motion has been voted on, so now you'll vote on the motion as amended.
So moved.
Second.
This is for the adoption of the rest of the items and the information item.
Councillor Dumanowski.
Just briefly, your worship, on the off-site levy municipal development subsidy. So I see the rate recommendations are similar. I believe they haven't changed or been altered. It's been an item of heavy conversation in the past. I think it's prudent for at least for the next year while we continue through our budget cycle, year 4, that those stay there. Each year we say there's an expectation that there will be a more comprehensive review. Is that something that we would expect that will be undertaken for the next budget cycle or the next year as it relates to the budget cycle? Because in this case, it's more of the same, which I'll support, but I wouldn't mind testing the waters, if you will, because I think it's been a while.
Through the chair, we can get a more detailed response if you like, Councillor Dumanowski, but the undertaking by management is that this will be concluded in 2022, and the intervening period should give us an opportunity to properly canvass this council's desires and to get out and engage the development community and other stakeholders to make sure that we're getting it right as we reset those rates in 2022.
Fantastic, thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, we will vote on the motion as amended. That is unanimous.
Thank you. Moving on to reports for reception. Police Commission meeting minutes of September 23rd for information.
Can I get a motion to receive the Police Commission meeting report for information?
So moved.
I'll second. Your worship, the reason I hesitated, I didn't attend that meeting that evening because we had our debate or forum, and so, but that would have been one of my last meetings, but I'll happily second it.
Thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, we will vote. And that is unanimous.
Moving along now to new bylaws for first reading. Bylaw 4685 22375, a bylaw of the City of Medicine Hat to amend bylaw 2379, the water service bylaw.
Motion for first reading?
I'd like to motion. Let's do it. Okay, sorry, first time here. Move for leave to introduce bylaw number 4685, a bylaw of the City of Medicine Hat to amend bylaw number 2379, the water service bylaw.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, we will vote. And that is unanimous.
And your worship, just a point of clarification, in case people in TV land, as I call them, are wondering, we're not typically going to debate at first reading. We reserve those questions until the advertising period is concluded, and then we bring it back to second and third reading.
Next bylaw is bylaw 4686, a bylaw of the City of Medicine Hat to amend bylaw 1541, bylaw of the City of Medicine Hat regulation to regulate the use of public and private sewers and drains and the disposal of sewage and the discharge of waters and waste into the Medicine Hat sewer system.
Move for leave to introduce bylaw number 4686, a bylaw of the City of Medicine Hat to amend bylaw number 1541. Do you want me to read the whole thing?
I've just read it into the record, so
Yeah,
you could
okay,
just
so
say,
I'm-
you can just say bylaw 4686.
Thank you.
Second.
Questions? Discussion? Seeing none, we will vote. And that is unanimous.
Next bylaw is bylaw 4687, a bylaw of the City of Medicine Hat to amend bylaw 1805, the waste bylaw.
Move for leave to introduce bylaw number 4687, a bylaw of the City of Medicine Hat to amend bylaw number 1805, the waste bylaw.
I'll
Second.
second.
To be read for the first time.
Oh, sorry, to be read for the first time, sorry.
Yeah, I think it was either Councillor Hyder or Councillor Hyder.
Any questions or discussion on that one? Seeing none?
Councillor Hyder, thanks.
That is unanimous.
And our next bylaw is bylaw 4688, bylaw of the City of Medicine Hat to amend bylaw 2244, the electric utility bylaw.
Move, oh, sorry, which one was that, 11.4?
Yep, 4688.
Move for leave to introduce bylaw number 4688, a bylaw of the City of Medicine Hat to amend bylaw number 2244, the electric utility bylaw, and that the bylaw be read a first time.
Second.
Questions, discussion? Seeing none, we will vote. It is unanimous.
Last bylaw for first reading tonight is bylaw 4689, bylaw of the City of Medicine Hat to amend bylaw 2489, the gas utility bylaw.
Move for leave to introduce bylaw number 4689, a bylaw of the City of Medicine Hat to amend bylaw number 2489, and that the bylaw be read a first time.
Second.
Questions, discussion? Seeing none, we will vote. And that is unanimous. This council is adjourned.